Hello, and welcome back to another jam-packed episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today, once again, is Michael Kurkowski. We have been guests on each other's podcast a number of times. I believe this is his second time on my podcast, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to be a good old time because he is an expert podcaster himself. If you have not checked out his podcast, The Strength Connection, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself because it is a very good one. We're going to be talking about a milestone that he recently hit, a couple of programs and plans that he has in mind to put out in the very near future, as well as a very cool challenge that he did this past August that I would suggest anybody consider. We'll talk more about that in a second. And before we do talk about it, I will talk about my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge, because what would an episode be if I were not shilling this challenge? Well, it's free first and foremost, so you can breathe easy. But one of the things that I think you're going to find that is especially a standout feature of it is that it is designed to be useful for the beginner all the way up to advanced, because it focuses on a movement pattern that almost nobody really trains for strength, whether they're beginner or advanced, and or intermediate, anything in between. And that is your gait pattern or your walking pattern. So learning how to get strong with that can help make you a whole lot stronger and a lot of other things with a lot less wailing, gnashing of teeth, and all sorts of other biblical signs of despair and things of that nature. So go to 9minutechallenge.com, get your own free copy. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com, and see what everybody is crowing about. I think you'll enjoy it. And now, without further ado, Mike, welcome back to the show.
What's up, my man? How are you? So
Good.
That's an introduction and a half right there. You are one of the best starters of podcasts. And I said, like, my hardest part when I do a podcast is always getting started in the right way, because it gets so many things you want to talk about.
Yeah.
You're just one of those guys that I just look at like as aesthetic appeal of like, yeah, this is how you started off. So clear and so precise. So bravo, my man.
I appreciate it. It's a gift, I suppose, no, I'm very happy to hear that, because the funny thing is I don't think about myself too much as a podcaster. I think of myself as a guy with a podcast in a certain sense. Like, I remember years ago I was reading something, I think it was somebody, it was like an interviewer had asked a question to Jackie Chan about him being a martial artist, and Jackie Chan is very humble, and he said, I consider myself not a martial artist, but somebody who does martial arts and wants to become a martial artist. Whereas I see Bruce Lee, who was one of his colleagues, and he was, a stunt double for Bruce Lee in the early days, said, I see Bruce Lee as a true embodiment of a martial artist. I'm simply somebody who's trying to become one. And I would say the same thing about me with podcasting. And maybe there's something to that. It's like you just try to keep it simple, keep it direct, keep it straightforward, and then you hit all the buttons that you're trying too hard to aim at otherwise. You know what I mean?
Right. No, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a like some symbolism and mastery in there, probably, right? It's like where when Jackie Chan said that to Bruce Lee, he sees himself as someone on the journey towards being a master, and Bruce Lee, who came before him, like in his eyes is a master. I bet Bruce Lee had his others who saw the same thing. It's all that trend of going downstream and upstream from there. But it is, when we start saying like, oh, I'm a podcast, it's kind of like when people, I'm a content creator. It's like, what do you mean? Like, that's who you are. It's like, it's when you start putting an identity to something, I think you start to put yourself in a box of what you're actually doing, when in reality, like the people I've spoken to, like you, other people I've, talked to who are successful in this game of strength, they don't pigeonhole themselves into I am this, or I'm like, yeah, that might be a title that I use and portray and put that hat on once in a while. But to say that's what you are, I think that you realize that, life is something bigger than that because you wear so many hats.
Yeah. Well, I think back to Ben Settle's email player rules, where he talks about axioms and maxims for being successful in marketing, and named after his email player's newsletter. But one of the email player's rules is, if you've got to say it, you ain't it. So if you say, I'm a content creator, it's like, it's not to say that you don't create content, but it's like, it's a weird way to try to identify yourself. If somebody asked, what are you to me, I would say, I would maybe either ask for more information, or what have you. But yeah, it's interesting because even though I create a lot of content, I kind of bristle at that label of like content creator, because I see it as being not central to who I am, but central to what I do, for my business and for my mission of trying to help as many people as I possibly can. And then I think it's using the Bruce Lee analogy. It's very easy to get to over focus on the finger pointing at the moon rather than focusing on the moon. The moon is the goal. That's what the finger is supposed to be pointing at,
Mm,
And a
yeah.
lot of people, I think, like to get caught up with staring at the finger, and then they're missing the whole point of the pointing finger to begin with.
Yeah. I don't know why this popped into my head when you were talking there, but one of the best things I heard when I was in business and learning like the aspect of sales and stuff. And there's a million different things about sales and closing and motivational interviewing. And I heard this line says, nobody needs to believe in what you're saying. They need to believe that you believe in what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And the best ones that really achieve that level of success, and success can be in a million different metrics, but the ones that really love what they do and they're, their own bosses every day, all that type of stuff that we thrive for, they really are authentic with their message. Like you believe that they believe in what the heck they're saying in there.
Yeah.
And from there, then you just, I think authenticity is just something that we all like look towards. We're curious about when somebody is really comfortable in their own skin and they're speaking and you just feel that energy. You're like, oh, what's this person about? Like you don't even know, their title oftentimes from that. They're just like, I want to listen to this person more.
Totally. And actually, I on that topic, I remember hearing something. I wish I could remember the person who said it, but he talked about like when people go to buy a used car, what they're really shopping for is, or the not even a used car, but a car in general. What they're really shopping for is not a car, but first a salesman. They want to know that they've got somebody who's got their back and who's going to help them try to find the car that's going to be good for them, and and what have you. So before you can even get to the point where you're going to buy the car, unless you're responding to like an ad in the newspaper or something like that, you've got to find somebody you believe in and somebody who can lead you. And I think it's very much the same with the stuff that we do, is that people might already be sold on kettlebells, they might already be sold on bodyweight training or strength training in general. But they want somebody to lead them. So the first thing that they're looking for, even though maybe the goal is to learn how to do kettlebells, the goal is to learn how to, do bodyweight exercises more effectively or how to get stronger, they first are looking for somebody who can not sell them on it, but who can teach them, in this case.
Right.
So I think that's very important. And a lot of people do make the mistake of trying to just kind of mimic other people, like, their mentors or their heroes and what have you. And that's one thing I've always tried to avoid as much as I can, like always give them as much credit as possible, by name and stuff like that. But I don't try to replicate what they do. I try to synthesize it into the stuff that I already do to the degree to which it's synthesizable. If it's not, of course, I just, make that very apparent, but say, hey, this would be a cool thing to do anyway. So, here's the information on it. But yeah, I think a lot of people try to be other people, and they just struggle from there, because it's like, how can you really connect with somebody who hasn't even connected with what it means to be him or herself,
Yeah, I used to see that a lot when I was early on in coaching. I always found that and then I became a manager. So I was training, trainers how to be trainers. And it was so fascinating. It was like clockwork. The brand new ones who were just so excited to just talk to people and share this information. The first few people that they talked to, those people ended up wanting to train with them. They ended up buying. And then all of a sudden you start thinking it's more than what you were doing before. It's like, they call it beginner's luck, but really you're just sharing your own passion with no agenda behind it. And when you have that no agenda feeling, you're just sharing information, just asking somebody about who they are, what they're aspiring to do. And do you have any information that could be of value to them? And if you do, then you're going to connect in, whatever way, you need to. But I think it's, when you were just on my podcast, what hit me so much the last you said this line of what's optimal versus what's practical.
Yeah.
And we're always chasing that optimal, like everything's what's the best way. And that could be a journey of 1 billion miles down the line, because there's always an exit you can take, no matter where you are in life, that's going to be better in that time versus the other. When in reality, if you're just focusing on what's actually practical at the moment and just simplifying things down and having a system in place for it, then you're going to get 95% of the way there of what we're all trying to do, which is be healthy, be strong, have good relationships, communicate well. Like, I mean, all those things that 99.9% of us want in the world. And then the other stuff is just the micro details.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have a tendency to be myopic about things, and that's why they head toward optimalism, let's say, in their approach. And I think actually it is interesting and valuable to learn how to optimize things, and because you can look at it from a perspective of like, how do I optimize things as best I can right now, knowing that I can't go the full distance? Like for instance, I'll take like, let's say you don't have any equipment at all. Okay. So maybe on a very general scale, you could look at trying to optimize what you've got with being like, okay, well, maybe I can't do swings, but I could do hip thrusts. So I'll just,
Right.
use my couch and I'll do that. It's not optimal, in the classic sense, but it's heading toward optimal. And I think of optimal as being kind of like that star on the horizon that you're never going to reach,
Mhm.
but your attempt to get closer to it is what's going to push you further ahead. But the mistake that a lot of people make is assuming that unless it's like 100, whatever they're doing is 100% optimal as opposed to like optimized, let's say,
Mhm.
then they just end up, miserable. And, you think about it, like if you're at best, maybe you get 5% of the time of your training will be optimal, truly, like for people who have
Right.
kids,
Mhm.
Dan John used to say that he would always start his workouts out in his basement with a front squat because he knew that if something happened and he had to take care of it, at least he got front squats in. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe his daughters started fighting with each other and he had to break it up. Maybe there was somebody showed up at the door. Maybe there was some sort of issue at the house that he had to take care of or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's an example of being practical versus optimal, and yet he still he did beautifully in
Right.
terms of his strength training. And so yeah, I think it's an important thing to keep in mind, and there's some nuance to it, um more than anything, a lot of times I see that optimalism rather
Mhm.
as like an attempt at making giving yourself an excuse, being like, well, I couldn't do it perfectly, so why bother doing it at all? It's like,
Right.
you don't do it at all, you're never going to do it perfectly. So you're damned if you do, you're
Yeah.
damned if you don't. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's funny because how do you find optimal? Usually you're looking at another person, of like, oh, well, this is what they do. I want to look like them or I want to be like them, not realizing that that person might have a decade of strength down the line and you're at a different, avenue. You're at a different lane. So
Yeah.
what's optimal for them is not optimal for you at the moment. So that's why a while ago I put together something I called it the go-to kettlebell playbook. And these were things of just specific exercises and protocols that I use when I'm either super crunched for time or I'm mentally drained. I just feel like I have no juice in my body,
Yeah.
or I want to get into a little bit more of like intuitive work, not follow like a structure behind. And just over like a year or so, I just happen to always go to these because one, the movements were, very multifaceted, multi joints. Also, I really enjoy doing them. Like I always liked doing it. And you just find those like go-tos. And I've used this with clients of like, if you're ever just in that mode where it's like where you're off, like you just mentally drained, or it's just a busy time, you just don't feel like you have the juice and you feel like you can't get that motivation in your body, what's your go-tos? Like have a couple of those in the tank where it's like, oh, I know these movements, I know them by heart, I can be focused on it. And yeah, and it's maybe not be exactly on your plan, but you're
Mhm.
still getting something done from it. So I
Totally.
put this together of like, these are the ones that I do. And then this is how you like create your own go-tos, like use mine as maybe some examples and then go find something for yourself. And I found working with clients of just having an option like that to just go to, it takes it from missing a day or feeling like you fell completely on track to still getting something done. Kind of like, Dan John's front squats.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that you have the right mindset about that, because there's so many people who have something similar to that. Like I remember hearing years ago, Ido Portal said that, and normally he's training hours and hours a day. That's just his thing. Um, but I think he said that like if he was traveling or there for whatever reason he couldn't move, he would at least try to get his hands on the ground before the end of the day. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily doing handstands, but he was doing something to really connect with the ground, and that helped keep him
Mm.
grounded and help make sure that his routine
Yeah.
stayed stable. And you have to just expect that if you're going to go anywhere, it's not going to be linear, like over the long haul. If you take like an eagle's eye view, that progress will look linear, but then as you start getting a lot closer, you're going to see that there's a lot of ups and
Right.
downs
Yep. Mm-hmm.
along the way. And so all you want is that trend upward. And yeah, I think if you have something that you can go to as you're like, okay, I can't do anything else, but I've got 5 minutes, I'll do some swings, or I've got 5 minutes, I'll do some crawling or something like that. It's going to take you a lot farther than if you're like, wow, I don't have 45 minutes, so I guess I'll use 0 minutes, and instead I'll just binge on Netflix and eat this entire bag of potato chips. It's like, if you care about optimal, that is definitely not an optimal choice.
Yeah. It's in my community, we call it the highway of strength analogy that we use. So like, because so many plans we think of, it's like it has to be straight down the middle, like that middle lane. And that's the only plan that you have. Where when we started talking about some intuition and life happens. Like if you're going to be healthy and strong and fit for your whole life, and that's your commitment, you're going to have seasons and times where weeks are going to go off, families, kids are going to get sick, family vacation. I mean, all this stuff of life is going to come up. You can't be so structured down and think that it's an all or nothing approach. If you do that, then it's then you're either doing something or you're doing nothing. So we talked about what's your right lane. So like Ito's there, we would call it the right lane. It's the non-negotiable. If everything else in the day goes to shit, I'm still getting this done. Like, what's your non-negotiable?
Yeah.
And I think just in the industry and where people's minds are often, we don't think that that's like, okay, it's either like I have to do everything that I slated down or it's a failure. When going back to that optimal versus practical, like I went so many times where I just went in and I'm like, all right, what do I feel like doing? I do 10 minutes of like an iron cardio protocol, and I'm not progressing in my strength on that day of like, this is a PR day, but it's just another chip. It's chopping wood for that next day. So having that middle lane, this is like my expected protocol. But if everything goes to crap, this is my right lane. I'm still progressing forward. It's a different speed that we're doing, but it's still moving forward. And the same on the left lane. If everything opens up and I'm feeling awesome, this is how I jump started. We're going to increase it a little bit. And having those options in there, that's where I think you can really look at an entire like season or entire year and be like, okay, this is how I'm going to navigate this regardless of what happens throughout the day.
Yeah. I have in mind, I had planned to write an article called The Art of Progressing Without Progressing. And the whole idea is just be content to show up, do the same thing without any intent of doing more reps or more weight or whatever. And then as you start to feel different, and you can feel like, okay, well now, these sets that I did yesterday and the day before and the day before that, now they're feeling easier. So maybe I'll just sneak up and add a little bit more weight to it, so or one extra rep or two extra reps here and there. And so the idea is that you're not trying to force the progress, you're trying to recognize it, and then you just kind of fill in the blank, as it were.
Yes.
And I bet you anything that your podcast was very much like that, because I know you had the Breakthrough Secrets podcast beforehand, and you and Chris did a ton of episodes like that. But then when you're solo and you got to do everything on your own, and you're in a sense, you're pulling double duty, because you guys probably had shared duties, when you were doing the Breakthrough Secrets. Once it turned into Strength Connection, I bet you could go back and listen to the first episode. And even if others can't necessarily tell a difference, I bet you could be like, wow, the 200th episode, this milestone that you've just reached is way different from the first one.
100. Yeah. When we first did the Breakthrough Secrets podcast, it was like, there was no planning involved with it. I mean, that's the beauty of the time that we live in right now. Anybody can start, anything, on the internet. And we just jumped on a Buzzsprout account and started doing podcasts, and then just got some guests in there, and then really enjoyed doing it. So we started doing it on every day, and it was fun. Like, we got a lot of connections now. We did like 160 episodes in 6 months. That speed of what we were doing, talk about a left lane, like that was just in the lane, pedal to the metal and just going, just because we were having so much fun with it. But we also went into that when you have like co-hosts, it's very easy to get away with not preparing as much, because if you don't have something to say, the other person will jump in and we'll kind of go. And it was a fun conversation. We had a good time with it. But when I started the Strength Connection and I looked at it really in that same sense, like the only progress I want to make is just doing it. Like, let me just see what this is, and just I'll figure it out on the way, just because I love interviewing people. I love talking to people and sharing stories. I learn so much from stories and analogies. I think we all do in many ways. So, but it was something like, okay, is this going to be just a hobby, or is this something that I'm going to really, emphasize to put in to make a part of what I'm doing for my business as well? And then it like I finally learned like, okay, regardless of who it is, how comfortable I am with the person, if they're a first time guest or they've been on before, I still make sure that I prepare my questions. Even if we don't get to like all the questions, I
Yeah.
still make sure that it's there. I think in two ways. One, it helps me be a lot more in the moment now, so I can just let it flow because I always have kind of a lifeline to pull on.
Hmm.
But two, also, I think just out of respect for the art form and respect for the person. Like, I mean, I think that's the weird thing with podcasts. Like, you know, you donate time to the person, like to the person to share what you're doing. And obviously there's opportunities to, you know, share the things that you're working on and stuff, but still like our most valuable currency is our time. And when I realized that, I was like, okay, like somebody's donating an hour of their time, maybe an hour and a half, because we're chatting a little bit beforehand and afterwards. It's like, yeah, no, you better take this seriously if you want to really make this a part of what you're doing. And once I started that, which I really was maybe like 5 or 10 episodes in, when that was really when I started like thinking of this, like, okay, like this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to build this platform up. All right, I'm taking this just as seriously as any coaching client or anybody that is, you know, paying me for my services at the time. And from there, it's just continuously just, you know, been a snowball that kept going downhill and just getting a little bit bigger every day.
And I think that's the essence really of honestly anything. I mean, we think we're using podcasting as the example here, but previously we talked about strength training. I
Mm-hmm.
think the same thing goes with learning any skill. To be honest, it's like, you know, you've got to. There are some people who start learning a skill and then they just don't quit, but they actually also never get better because
Mm,
they just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So they don't have this forward intent where they think like, you know, like what I was talking about with progressing without progressing. You know, you may do the same thing over and over and over again, but then when you start to feel that what you've been doing is getting easier because you've been using the proper intent while doing it, you know, like just give you an example. Before this, I've got a busy day full of calls set up, and so I'm trying to sneak my workout in, like in between the gaps in my schedule. So I went and I did a couple of sets of weighted pull-ups, and I always, you know, I'll pull up quickly with good amount of tension, and then I'll lower slowly, and like over the course of 4 seconds,
mm-hmm.
and then I pull up, and you know, so my intent is such where I'm not just doing the reps, I'm performing the reps in such a way
Yes.
that the
Mm-hmm.
body will get the hint to start adapting, especially after I've done it long enough, and this way it gives me like that added edge. So it's been like clockwork. Every couple of weeks I could just add a couple more pounds to the weight belt. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a ton, but you think about the percentage of from where I started to now is going up. So that means my 100% is also going up
Mm-hmm.
without me really even having to touch it. And the same thing goes with podcasting. You know, you show up and each time you think like, oh, okay, maybe I used too many ums and ahs. This time I'll try to be a little more careful about that. And then it becomes second nature. And then you add something else that you can get better at. And, you know, it's exact same thing with fitness. It's same thing
Mm-hmm.
with language learning, which is something I'm a fanatic about. It's the same
Yes.
thing with podcasting. You know, you've got to have that forward intent. And, you know, 200 episodes, that's a great example of somebody who's got that stick to itiveness, but also the forward intent. What would you say in particular is something that you've learned the most about the art form of podcasting since you started doing it with
Mm-hmm.
I would say particularly with the strength connection, because you mentioned Breakthrough Secrets was kind of just like, you know, it was like just a left lane all the way, you know,
Yeah.
going as
Mm-hmm.
fast as you can. But now that it's something where it doesn't have to be left lane and it's more right lane and you can
Mm-hmm.
refine, like what are some of the big takeaways you've gotten over these last 200 episodes?
So personally, you know, one thing I learned, especially the art of communication, is slowing down. Like I was for a while, I was always afraid of silence in
Yeah.
like a conversation. You want everything to flow, so I would start immediately speaking as soon as the guest stopped speaking and going into the next. And when I would go back and listen to it, or even in the process of it, I'd be like, I'm just filling in words right now, like before getting to the next step. And when you're getting into any type of long form work, like it's okay to have those breaks and like ingest the information and then go to the next, ask for clarification. Hey, can you speak, can you reframe that again? Like I know what you're saying, but not. So kind of just being very authentic in what you're trying to get to. If I'm curious about it and I'm, you know, curious about like what the guest is saying, then I'm pretty sure like a vast majority of people listening are probably thinking the same thing. I think there was there's something about that. Like there was a college study about like when somebody said, "Oh, I'm afraid to ask a stupid question." But like when somebody asked that question, 80% of the class had the same question. They're just afraid to ask on there. So it's kind of similar in there. But the big thing I learned this from Fabio actually in my first episode that I did of the Strength Connection. And I'll try and curate this story as much as possible for time's sake. But at the point, I didn't know if I wanted to go into another podcast. Do I want to do it solo? I really loved doing it with Chris before, but I really loved the interview. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to give it a go. But still, it wasn't something I was sure, like, am I just going to do this for a bit or what? And Fabio Zonin, master instructor with StrongFirst, was the first guy I had on. If anybody knows Fabio, he's one of the most fun guys to talk to in the world. He's such a genuinely amazing guy.
Yeah.
So like 5 to 10 minutes into that first episode with him, I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. Like I'm so comfortable speaking and interviewing. And he said a line in there about building the skill of strength that stuck with me. And he talked about like a deadlift. Like if you step up to a bar and it's got the max weight on it that you've ever lifted, you're going for a PR. Of course you're going to be focused because you have to be. If you're not focused on what you're doing at that time, the bar's not moving or you're going to hurt yourself. He's like, so to be focused in the times that are most challenging to us is not a task because we have to be. You build the skill of strength when that bar has half of that load, when you know you don't have to focus in order to still perform it, but you put that same respect and that same focus when you step up to the bar.
Yeah.
That's where you can really build your technique, really build the skill of it, that practice of it. And there's a million stories like this. Michael Jordan practiced harder than he ever did in a game, like because you know that you can take a day off and it won't really matter in the grand scheme, you think, but it's the mentality of that.
Yeah.
And I learned that so much in, actually, I think it's Dan John's rule of like the law of 10-80-10, where he talked about like the park bench versus the bus bench workouts, and where sometimes you're just punching the clock. A lot of the days that we have in just our life are kind of in that 80%. It's not really great. It's not a PR day, but it's not the worst day in the world either. They're somewhere in the middle. So it's those days when you can put your best effort and your best focus in to do it. Like, I don't like, yeah, could I do this podcast episode and not prepare for it? Yeah, I could probably get away with it, but that's exactly what I'm doing. I can get away with it. So it's the same with strength training. Like, yeah, I could miss today. I could, but I'm tired. I don't feel like it. Yeah, I can miss today and I can make it up tomorrow. Yeah, in the very micro of the day, that might work. But in the mindset of what you're building is you're giving yourself that opportunity that this is not as important to you.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest takeaways right off the bat that I've gotten. There's been many more afterwards, but that law of putting your best effort with what you have every day in there started with Fabio. And I've learned that from Dan John. I learned it from my mentor, Brian Grasso, on the same type of thing. And it's make those mediocre days the best that you can. And that's really going to elevate you to the next day.
Yeah, big time. I think, if people look at it as more of like, you suck the emotion out of it, because so many people are like, go hard or go home, give it 110%, no pain, no gain. It's like, well, I really think actually that the clients that I've had who had most contact with those kind of, what would be the words, like slogans or whatever, are the ones who had the hardest time making the change to like, I want you to be emotionless. I want this to be something where it's like brushing your teeth. And, and I would give them like some strategies on how to do that, but it took a longer time for them to make that transition, because they were just so used to thinking that they had to completely annihilate themselves in a workout. And once people understand that light and moderate days are what set the stage for you to be able to lift heavy, then they start to understand the value of the consistency and doing things even if you don't really necessarily feel like it. But it's not as big of a leap because that emotion is not there. It's just a matter of momentum at this point. And I think it's true with just about everything. You don't have to expect miracles, but like, what Fabio talked about, if you're trying to lift more weight than you ever lifted in a deadlift, your success is really going to be dependent on all the days where you lifted way less than that. And I think that I think it's a perfect analogy, and it's a good reminder too for people who we want to turn this analogy into something that you might recognize with strength, and has connection with other skills, is that you've got to, it's those light and moderate days that build strength, and it's the heavy days that test it. So you don't need, imagine if every day you went to school and there was a test. Well, when would you have any time to learn anything?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a
It's
perfect
just,
analogy.
it's complete foolishness. Now, on the topic of strength training, you know, we've talked a bit about podcasting and the analogies between the kettlebell and the microphone. So I know you've been working on something for the snatch in particular. You're something of a snatch fanatic, and I believe you have some sort of a program or a routine or some other diabolical scheme to get people strong AF with the kettlebell snatch. So please regale us.
Yeah. So the secrets of the Snatch Seminar, something I wanted to do after I finished Strong First Elite last year. I went through a year of a lot of barbell training, just kind of playing around with different techniques with kettlebell work before. But once that was done, I was like, okay, what do I really want to do? And I really wanted to go in and start looking at like, what can I master? Like I'm looking at like, what can I really master? Not on just the physical side, but connecting the mental side with it as well. The snatch with kettlebell training has always spoke to me as something more. Something about the movement. I think the technical scientific term is badassery. So
I
it's
recall
just
that term. Yes.
it feels like it just feels badass. If you really broke down every different piece of the kettlebell snatch, there's like 10 things that are going on, you know, from the hinge, from the drop, you know, from the ballistic work, from taming the arc, you know, which is from your book, you know, which is freaking phenomenal right there. I'm in the middle of it right now. To just when you hit that just technique right with like the low pull and just get in where everything connects at the top, there's just something that felt just very athletic to it, as well as strong, as well as the conditioning piece. Just it feels like that one movement all in one. And I was just like, when I was, you know, figuring out what I wanted to do afterwards, I'm like, what if I just like snatched for a year, like, and just got into the details of it.
Yeah.
And I started just doing that. I started playing around with that with a little bit of iron cardio work. And when I went into the secrets of the Snatch Seminar, it wasn't just specific protocols that I was putting in there, like, oh yeah, this is a smoker and stuff like that. This is really good. I actually went about like how I approach snatching, where like one of the biggest things that I found is breath ladders with snatching. That's been one of the most impactful things that I've done in my conditioning of anything else. We could talk about that a little bit deeper, but the other stuff that I did is like approaching your training, just like I talked about with that story of Fabio, like approaching it with a mindset of focus. I'm like, how much can I focus on 100 reps? Like getting every rep as precise and perfect as possible. So using a weight like a 28K, like, you know, very easy weight for 5 reps to do. And was doing that for like every 90 seconds for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes up to an hour. So the conditioning never was like a snatch testy type feel, but it's just every time you approach it, it's like, okay, how can I make this next set of 5 the absolute best?
Yeah.
So it challenged not only my strength, because you do get depleted from it. I mean, it's still 30 minutes to 60 minutes of work, but how's my drive through the ground? How am I spreading the ground apart? How's my hip snap? Am I rotating it all in my shoulder? How's my low pull? Am I getting it on my wrist quick enough that I finish in that lockout? Am I pausing enough at that lockout to feel that standing press? Am I keeping that drop close? Am I getting that 45-degree angle back versus more of like a swing, you know, pull? So I'm getting that connection and, you know, equity in my feet, feeling it in all different areas of it. So all these different things, I'm like, can I get all these things working at one point together? And what I found from it is it's just a lot more fulfilling of a practice rather than just going in and like, oh, 6 weeks, I want to do XYZ with my body composition or my strength and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, how much can I really focus on every practice that I do? So one of the things I did is I had a mantra. Every time I step in beforehand and I speak a mantra, it's almost like a silent prayer that I do before every practice. So with that, the snatch was it's more of an exercise that I found is not just the physical side of it, but that's something that really connect the mental side of strength, that spiritual side of strength, and bring them all together.
Certainly. Yeah. And I think that the focus on mastery, even if that doesn't become your focus for the snatch forever, the fact that you've spent any time doing it is going to make it a lot easier in the future when you want to ramp things back up or prepare for your snatch test. And I think the key too is that learning how to apply that physically makes it a lot easier for people to apply that sort of a thing with other skills. Like I remember Jeff Newport once talked about, like, in an email. At the time I didn't get it. I thought it was kind of a stretch, but now I can see, okay, I think he was onto something. Like, if he was ever dealing with anything difficult in his personal life or in work or whatever, he would harken back to like particularly difficult squat workouts and then draw on the energy or the lessons that he had learned from that and say, well, if I could survive that workout, I can figure out my way through this. And again, at the time I didn't really understand the connection, because I was like, well, that's tenuous at best. But the reality is that you think about the skill that goes into it, like the skill you're describing with each different element of the snatch. It's the same thing with the squat. Maybe it's not, well, definitely it's not the same set of steps and technique, tweaks or whatever, because they're two very different movements, but the process is the same. Am I, driving the ground apart? Am I sitting between my feet? Am I, looking up on the way up? Am I so like all of these different things tells you, what do I have to do next to be successful? And I saw this video of Frank Mir. Do you know who Frank Mir is?
Yeah. The MMA fighter.
Exactly. He was, for those who have not heard of him, he was a UFC heavyweight champion for a while, and I think he fought Brock Lesnar after he got into UFC. Brock first fought a guy named Heath Herring, who I thought was going to win. I thought Herring was going to destroy him, and Brock actually won. But then he fought Frank Mir, and Frank beat him. And Frank is like an exceptional grappler, and he talked about fighting one of the Nogueira brothers. There's Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, and then there's another Antonio Nogueira, but they're both like twin brothers, I think.
Yep.
Both in MMA, both, terrifying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champions. Yep. And Frank got in a headlock at one point, and he said, people would ask me, like, well, what did you think? Were you thinking, like, how am I possibly going to win now? He's like, no, you're thinking way too far ahead. He's like, all I could think about was the next thing I had to do. Like, okay, he's got me around the neck, move my head out of the way. I can breathe now. Now I'm going to shift my body this way. Cool. I've broken the grip a little bit. Now I'm going to grab his arm. And then he walked through the steps to get out of this chokehold or submission that he was in. And he was able to then build each step one upon the other in order to win the fight. And I thought it was a great analogy for really anything. It could be, we talk a bit about skills, there's the idea of podcasting. Like, okay, you're not saying like, how am I going to make my episode number 2 the greatest podcast I've ever done? You're saying, maybe how can I add a little bit more? How can I be cool with silence a little bit more?
Right.
How can I allow that gap to give people like even just a second more to think about what was just said? So I'm not crowding out their thinking process. Once you can do that, then you can say, okay, how can I include fewer verbal pauses, like ums and ahs and and stuff like that. And it's the exact same thing with business. It's the exact same thing with learning an instrument. It's all the exact same thing. It's like the process remains the same. But I think, and this has been my experience, is that if you can do it physically, you can do it mentally.
Yes.
But many times it's easier to get to the mind through the body than it is to get to the body through the mind. At some point or another, you create a strong enough bridge where you can do that. But initially, I think having a physical practice of some sort really helps people.
100%. I remember John Danaher, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach, one of the most famous coaches in the world, talked about that with mental practices for his athletes. And he said, you have to tie it to a physical component. It's like, and it resonated with me a lot, because I think meditation is great. It's a great practice to do. But if you only rely on that to build resilience, it's like, usually you're in meditation, you're in a nice, comfortable room, like it's 72 degrees. Like, you don't have to be resilient at that moment. Yeah. But if you take that same mindset and that same intention into a physical practice, now you're solidifying it. Now you can actually use it and have access to it when you need it at those times. And there's something about it too. I mean, for me as well, I mean, same for you. I've been practicing this modality of training, this system, for a dozen years. So it took a lot of structure and a lot of work on a lot of different things to do to get to this level. But I was always really fascinated with that work. I was a huge baseball fan and a baseball player growing up. And there's some different videos that you can see of like Pete Rose talking about hitting. And in 4 minutes, he has like so many golden nuggets on hitting, of what to do when you're going off, how to step up in the box, back in the box, in, out, choke up on the bat, down. And he learned this after 4,000 hits in the major leagues. And those little details of just changing, adjusting, the elbow angle, where's your weight shifting in it? Like all those little things that come in. It's like, first, you need to learn how to just swing and get that natural ability. But then getting into the detail, like that's where a lot of fun comes in. And we're from a system of strong first where we talk practice, not train, like get strong while you're practicing the movements. And I think that's the approach that if everybody adopted that in especially their body, especially the physical side of strength, then you can go into it in the mental side and the business side, that stick-to-itiveness. If you can do it in the physical, then I think it's an example that you can use to pull out to go into any other avenue that you go into. And I've used that in my own life, specifically with building a business the last couple of years and the podcast, everything like that.
Yeah. And earlier on, you mentioned how you learn best through like stories and analogies, and that what better way for other people to learn than the exact same thing. So it's like learn a physical discipline of some sort, and then you can apply that to a more cerebral discipline, and it becomes a lot easier. I think the reverse is typically more difficult for people, like to be in their head and then try to work it into something physical. Generally not as easy, but learning from the physical side of things and then applying that to opening your own business and then applying it to, growing or marketing the business or whatever makes it a whole lot easier. So I'm sure that for those who are astute observers who understand analogies when they go through Mike's Snatch Seminar, the Secrets of Snatch Seminar, they'll have a better understanding of how it applies to themselves and a variety of other things. So I encourage people to check it out. Is it live yet, or is it going to be live soon, or what are some details about that?
No, it's out now. So I have a specific code that I can give you. Anybody listening, if they want to grab it, they can grab it for free. It's a 1-hour seminar that I did. Along with it is there's a playbook of kind of really the transcript of everything that we go on there. I go into beginner level, intermediate, and advanced, all different 3. So if you're just learning how to get into snatch work, I go over techniques, the best ways to practice it and to apply it. So I don't know if you do this, but I always found teaching somebody to snatch, it's easier to do it top down, of just learn from the top and just get that drop down, working that, going into things like the half snatch and the reverse half snatch, which I think are phenomenal exercise. I think the half snatch is the best exercise in the kettlebell world, because specifically for snatching, you don't have that momentum of the top drop. You have to drop it from the clean position to get that real, hip drive back, get that power production to work of snatching back up. I think it's one of the best exercises to do. So going over that, as well as the specific exercises for conditioning, for mindset, if you want to go on that approach, if you want to just practice more intuition, time under tension, all that good stuff.
I want to make an analogy here, because you said you talked about how learning the snatch from the top down tends to be more successful approach. That's been my experience. And again, let's use that as an analogy for learning any other skill. You want to figure out where you want to go first, and then you work your way backward to figure out what you're going to need to do to get there. But if you're just like, well, I don't know the exact destination, I'm just going to get started, it's a lot harder to hit your mark because you don't have a target. And so starting with the kettlebell overhead at the end position and then working your way down makes it a lot easier to retrace your steps. Same thing with any other skill. Again, a lot of times I'll liken it to like learning a foreign language. If you say, okay, I want to be able to have a 15-minute conversation in my target language in 90 days. But okay, that's a lot easier than, oh, I want to be able to, have a conversation in 90 days. Well, how long? You could have a conversation like, I'd like to order a coffee. Okay, here you go. Is that sufficient? Are you happy with those results? That's what you got to? Like, you could probably get there a lot sooner. So makes more sense to have that end goal, and that's a good example of it. You start the snatch by learning from the top position, then you work your way down. You start by working toward a goal by figuring out where the destination is, and then you work your way down. So the analogy, folks, is I think is pretty straightforward. A lot of people would miss it, but not you, because you are a listener of the Hammercast. Ergo, you're a cut above the rest. Similarly, if you listen to the Strength Connection, I think we just, these people, gravitate toward our stuff. People who understand 100. Analogies, and
Yeah.
sarcasm and other great
Exactly. Yeah.
like that.
Well, that's Stephen Covey right there. That's Begin with the End in Mind.
Yeah,
It's from the
exactly.
best book, 7 Habits of Highly
Absolutely.
Effective People. That's still one of my favorite books ever. It's interesting with goal setting too, because I think I've had this question for a long time of why do we not set goals? It's like oftentimes it's like we just start wandering. In fitness, it's like a lot of times we just start wandering into something, just start moving, doing anything. And it's the equivalent of, we live in the 2023, we have GPS systems for anything. You can type it in and it will tell you where to go. But it's pretty much the same as we go into a lot of health and fitness of, oh, we'll just get in the car and just start driving around and at least we're moving. We don't know if we're in a direction or not from there. It's like, have that. And I think it is, because as soon as you put a goal down, it could be scary because now you've made a commitment, even in your own mind, of like, oh yeah, no, this is important to me. And if I fail, then I'm going to feel really bad about myself. To get over that first and be like, no, like, where do you want to go? Like, what's the vision of what you have? And then figure out exactly where you are at the moment. And then you bridge that gap together. I think it was Goggins' thing when he talked about the pull-up record, when he heard like, oh, this is the 4,000 pull-ups in 24 hours. And most people are like, oh my God, I could never do that. Kind of like what Frank Mir said, when people were talking to Frank Mir, he's like, no, he's just got a piece of paper and started breaking down the math. Like, okay, 4,000 pull-ups, 24 hours. This is how many per hour. All right. So how many per minute? All right. If I do this, then I could break the record. It's like, okay, well, this is what you have to do to get there. Like, work it from the way back. So it's it's a great analogy for any type of goal.
Certainly. And one thing I will point out too regarding the goals, I know I learned this from Matt Fury, that there are essentially two different classes of goals. You've got destination goals, which is kind of like what we've been describing up to this point. Find your end point and then work your way backward. And for some things, I think that's essential. For other things, I think it might be essential, or it might be useful at some point, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Like he's also talked about the other type of goal would be like a process goal. And I think this would be somewhat analogous to Dan John's talk about park bench versus bus bench. Like bus bench, the analogy here is that if you're waiting for a bus, it's because you have a place to be at a certain time. And if the bus shows up 10 minutes late, it's going to ruin your whole day. So it's very time bound. It's very specific. And there is a certain level of stress that comes with it. And I do think that that's one of the things people don't realize, that process goals are legitimate goals, because they'll be like, well, yeah, I mean, I want to lose 30 pounds, but they're not thinking about losing 1 pound, which is what they should easily be focused on first, or I want to do 20 push-ups and, they can only do 5. It's like, well, maybe you should focus on just doing 6. Like once you can do 6, like what is the process going to look like to take you from 5 to 6? It's a lot less scary. It's easier to take the emotion out of the goal. And then it's also easy to turn it into something you do daily, where the goal is actually just doing the thing daily. The goal is not, it's the park bench. You're not in a rush. You don't have to be anywhere anytime soon. And he's talked about that as being a good way for people to get fit or to improve any other number of different things. I mean, I can give you an example from the business side of things. Last year, I decided, it was probably like in February of 2022, the very end of it, that I was going to put out social media content every single day. And I even ended up going above and beyond, because I included like a daily article on Medium and a daily podcast eventually. And of course, I also had daily YouTube video. I had daily posts on social media, and the goal was just to do it every single day. And that was it. And now the goal behind it is that I wanted to grow my email list. And so what I found is that I definitely grew it. I mean, I think I almost doubled it. And, I didn't have a specific goal, like I'm going to get to X number of subscribers on my email list. It was, I'm just going to do this every day, and I'm going to see what happens to the email list. And, lo and behold, it grew like quite a bit. And so I think that that's another thing that people can lean on if they feel a little bit skittish about, like, oh, what if 3 months go by and instead of doing, 100 snatches in 5 minutes, I can only do 80. It's like, well, if you went from 40 or 50 to 80, that's still really good. So you got to give yourself credit. It's not that big of a deal that you didn't get exactly to the destination. You got really close. And so, I think for some people and sometimes some goals, process goals are a great way to go about it. Other times, if you want a destination goal, you got to do like what we've described, and you've got to figure out exactly what it is that you want. ideally by when, and then you work backwards. And it is less scary because now you at least have the path forward. You're not roaming through the woods and hoping that you're going to reach a village at some point,
Yeah.
because why not? You're going in the general direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I have a similar mindset of how I approach process too. Like I just finished a challenge in August. I called it the August Unplug Challenge. And so for 31 days, every day, for 30 minutes a day, I put away everything. No technology, no book, no journal, took my watch off, like everything, just sat in complete silence for like forced unproductive time in there. And I wanted to do this for the sake of what's going to happen. Like how does my mind think when it's completely away from everything? And I realized I spoke with Todd Durkin on my podcast, and I love Todd. He's such a great guy. And he talked about his mellow yellow time and talk about a guy that wears a million hats with so much energy all the time. He makes it a point to have that downtime, like all the time, of like that unproductive time, because creativity and things that we really want to get to, like it comes when we're bored. Like it doesn't come when we're busy with all this stuff.
Yep.
So like you have to put yourself in that situation. I realized even the time when I was in self-care or kind of mindset, like I was journaling or I was reading a book or I was going for a walk, I'm still kind of attaching something that I'm doing to another productive thing. I'm like, what if I just shut all that out? Like I just turned it off, turned the lights down, like took my contacts out. So like just closed my eyes and just like 30 minutes completely unproductive. And what happened, like 80% of the time really wasn't too great here or there. 10% of the time, I'm like, this effing blows. I don't want to do this. Like my mind's just racing. I got a million things to do. There was another 10% of time that actually led to another program that I just did and launched out. And now I've got 8 people that are doing it. And it's a phenomenal program I'm excited about just from that time of clearing things out. So it's that kind of detaching from the outcome. Like it's good to have goals, but when you get into the process goals, the caveat on that is detach yourself from that outcome. Yeah, you want to do 100 reps, but if you keep doing the process, like you're going to get to where you're supposed to be at that time. So like when I got into this, I found it huge. I'm doing another challenge this month for kind of using your own words when you're journaling, like soft words and that type thing for a specific time frame. But as you said, like do it every day. You do social media every single day. I think that's such a powerful thing where we're so easy to like, I want to be flexible with, I'm going to do this twice a week or 3 times a week. Like, no, work out every day. Like take 10 minutes every single day and do something, see what happens.
Yeah.
And I applied that with training. I've done that, like just short bouts of it, like those almost like microdosing workouts type things. You can do that with anything. And I think if you do it on where you're consuming it every day, you're going to find out a lot more about what's productive for you, about what works for you, and also what doesn't work for you. So kind of the moderation type stuff, I think that applies in the grand scheme of things. But if you're really trying to make a change or a commit to something, do it every day.
Exactly. Don't think about what the end is going to be. Think about all I have to do is get through this day and then reassess in a certain amount of time. I mean, this is a good example of what can come from a process goal. You've now got a program with 8 people involved that didn't exist at the beginning of it. And it was because you had this idea from just what, you estimated being like 10% of the effort that you put into it, And so who wouldn't like that? Because you found something that is going to allow you to help people. You're going to be able to profit from it. Their lives will be changed positively as a result. And it was because you allowed yourself to be bored 30 minutes a day. And I think it's key. And this is, before the podcast started, I was telling you that I decided today, it's only today, said I'm not going to touch my phone for as long as possible. I even went so far as to put new batteries in an old alarm clock so that when I woke up, I didn't have to use the phone and then feel tempted to scroll and all this other business. And so far, I haven't touched anything. I haven't checked my email, been a lot more focused. I was a lot better at setting up a to-do list on my calendar. And, maybe I'll do the same thing tomorrow. Maybe I'll do the same thing the day after that. Maybe we'll just see where things go from there. But I think that that sort of thing is very powerful. So know when to set destination goals, when to set process goals, and just enjoy the journey. as it were,
Yeah.
because
And everything you need to do is going to be there when, when it's done. You didn't miss
yeah,
anything. There's a great line, and I'll finish with this story, because while I was doing this challenge, I heard this story from Teddy Roosevelt, and where when Roosevelt was in office, he would go on like month-long hunting trips, like out in Yosemite and stuff, where nobody could reach him.
yeah,
He was in office as president, and he would go away for like weeks at a time. So if the president can be away for 3 weeks and the country's still standing from there, you can get away from your phone, for half the day.
yeah,
It's like, it just puts it into perspective.
yeah. I think it's because people were so terrified of Teddy to step out of line. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
very
well,
much
just
so.
yeah. I mean, this is a dude who grew up with like asthma, and then he just would swim the ice cold Potomac River every morning, and then he would
Yeah,
invite people to the White House to fight them. Like he would
that's
have
it.
judo matches and wrestling matches with all these top wrestlers. Yeah, he
Let's
was
go.
harder than
Yeah.
coffin nails. We need somebody again like him in
That's the
office.
man. Yeah, the man in the arena right there. So
Yeah. But I will just say this one last thing that I think, since we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, I thought this was cool. He said, if I were not the president of the United States, I would like to be George Hackenschmidt, one of the strongest, most unbelievably accomplished wrestlers and weightlifters of his day. Spoke 7 languages.
Yeah.
Was just a phenom. So
Yeah.
you got, that's the other thing. You need someone to look up to. Even Teddy Roosevelt, the most, amazing berserker president this country has ever had somebody to look up to.
And if podcasting was around during Teddy's age, he would have been the greatest interviewer ever. So
Absolutely.
he would, if he was meeting with someone and he didn't know about them, he found out what they were interested in, he would spend the entire night up learning about this. If you liked horses, he didn't know anything about horses. He would learn about every horse that you had, about horse, so he could ask you questions about what you were interested in. That's why everybody, they said when you left a conversation with Teddy Roosevelt, you were excited to see him the next time, every time. And it's like, I'm like, that was so powerful.
And that his focus would not have waned at all, because he got shot in the chest during a speech once, and he just finished the speech. It took an hour and a half to finish it.
Yeah.
And
he looked at everybody, he's like, who else wants some? Like,
yeah, exactly. He was not one to trifle with. Well, where can people find you and check out more information about the secrets of the snatch and all other things, Strength Connection and Michael Kurkowski /Keaton?
Perfect. Yeah. Inside joke. Go listen to our last episode on that.
Exactly.
I'm most active on Facebook. I'm an old soul like that. So you can go check me out, Michael Kurkowski. You can go to my private Facebook group, which is The Strength Connection, which is all more of the exclusive stuff where I talk about different things from the podcast, get different insights in there. If you want to go to mystrengthconnection.com, that's my site where you can go in. You can download my 1-day strength challenge, which is a free ebook about how to start going from structure to intuitive training. I give you the whole details and behind that with the highway of strength analogy, as we spoke about here. That's free. You just have to throw in your email and I'll send it right over to you. But for the secrets of the Snatch Seminar, what I'll do is I'll get a personal code over here to the Hammercast, where if you put that code in, you can get that for free. You can check that out. It's a 1-hour seminar along with the playbook, which goes over all of the details behind learning it, optimizing it, and training it.
Fantastic. And folks, I suggest that you do that, because if you don't, I'm going to come to your house and I am going to knock on your door until you answer, and I'm going to insist that you do it. And you don't want that, because I can be very insistent. No, but real, Michael is he's been somebody who has been in this game almost as long as I have, which is a rarity. As both he and I can tell you, he's a very, very bright guy, incredible insights into all things training. It's always a joy to speak with him. And I don't know why I'm speaking of him in the third person. He's right there in front of me right now. I guess I'm turning my attention toward the audience.
Likewise, brother. Yeah.
Yes, but thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Always a blast.
And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.